Oh, are we live?
Welcome into Emerald and Lilywhite. This is episode 49, and Spurs have officially announced Thomas Frank. Not to be confused with Frank Thomas. We're not talking about the big hurt right now. We were talking about the Dane himself, Mr. Thomas Frank, formerly of Brentford. But yeah, a lot to unpack. It is official. We are recording at 2:46 Pacific time on Thursday, I believe the 12th of June. And again, Spurs have just, as of about 90 minutes ago, officially announced that Thomas Frank is at the helm of the club, signs a 3-year deal, taking him through 2028, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, we're here to break it all down. With me, as always, my co-host Max at Going Limbs. What's up, man?
What's up? Yeah, dude, I'm hyped. I'm hyped for the Thomas Frank era. I think he just seems to be like a good fit for the club. I think. So I'm excited. I'm excited to break it down.
Word. Yeah, and with us also is Robbie at Robbie_Light. Robbie, what's up?
Yeah, not much. I was saying in the pre-show, I'll get there excited-wise. Still just a little sad and bummed by the change in coaching and the decision there and what that means for maybe some of our players that maybe want to go. But objectively, Thomas Frank seems like a stabilizing hire. I think the term we use in American sports, like high floor hire, like ideally, even if we're not that great, we're still not going to be disgustingly bad. And he seems like a developer of like a very hands-on coach, which is the complete opposite of Ange Postecoglou. From what I've seen of like training footage where he's in players' ears nonstop, instructing them, guiding them, whereas Ange just kind of let players do what they wanted in training. And, he had a structure, but he wasn't intervening. So I think that's, the nature of a Tottenham hire is we always find someone that's the opposite in some way of the guy we just had. And hopefully that opposite isn't winning trophies. So we'll find out.
Yep. Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people, like you said, Robbie, who are like, oh, I'll get there eventually. I think a lot of people were emotionally tied to Ange, obviously, for obvious reasons, to use the word obvious too many times there. But I understand why people were so drawn to Ange. But like you said, there's going to be a few folks, including yourself, who are going to get there. I'll consider myself, again, apathetic, agnostic. I think in my 14 years of being a Spurs fan, I've gotten to a point where like my only response to this is whatever, bro. I don't know, whatever. This is just going to continue to happen. But I want to pass it over to Max because Max, you are hyped about this, and I'm glad that somebody is, man. I'm not here to shit on this hire at all. I think Thomas Frank is a good manager for sure. But I want to pass it over to you to talk about why you're so pumped about this.
Yeah, I think the number one thing one of you guys just said, he seems like a real like proper coach, like developer of players, and really trying to get the most out of like the players he's given. I think that's exactly what we need. And I do think that despite the flaws that our squad currently has and what we saw this season, that we have so much talent on the team and so much young talent. And he seems like a guy that is primed to get the most out of those players, especially during these key developmental years. Secondly, his demeanor, his vibe, I think kind of matches what I look for in a coach. He's not too like outspoken or anything. Like he's more of like the opposite of Ange. He's like quiet. He's confident, but in his tactics and his methods, but he doesn't feel the need to like come off as arrogant. And I think that his demeanor kind of matches what I'm looking for in a coach. And I think his tactical setup as well fits our player profiles well. I know he deploys like more attacking fullbacks. and less like touchline based wingers. I mean, you see Mbuemo and Wisa, like they're like wingers, but they're also strikers. It's kind of like a middle ground, which I think a lot of our wingers fit that profile. Tell, Johnson, and Son, I think all fit that perfectly. And then attacking wise, I think Porro, like I know he's converted wingers to fullbacks before. That feels like what exactly Pedro Porro is for Tottenham. So I kind of like how the profiles are aligning. And then I think we have an outside shot at getting Brian Mbuemo. He's been heavily linked to Manchester United. And they're offering him a huge contract. I think Robbie said it was like 250K a week or something. I know we're not paying that, but like the pull of Champions League plus Thomas Frank could be enough to convince him to come our way. So nothing concrete there, but if he's able to attract a player like that, that's someone who's at the very top of my list. And then, yeah, there's grumblings that we just have a lot of versatile players in our squad that I feel like under Ange, whether that was beneficial or not, they were kind of forced into the roles that he likes to play. And I think that Frank is more willing to adapt to the strengths of the players. And I think that we have a lot of players that are really good at like one specific thing that wasn't maybe being utilized as much. I think just Kulusevski, like Ange found out like he was a really good creator, but it was always tough because we also have Madison. I think Frank is a guy that finds a way to play both of those, because you look at like Wisa and Mbuemo, they have very similar profiles. You would think that in a one striker system, it would be kind of tough to play those guys together. I think he figured out a way, because they're his two best players, to get them on the pitch. I like the way he utilizes the 10 role. We're looking at a lot of 10s in the market. And then like I think Porro, especially the fullbacks, they get a lot of coverage and help from the midfield. So I think that's where the 6 comes in this system. But I just like the profiles. I like his style of coaching, his demeanor. I think it matches what I'm looking for in a coach, and hopefully we can get results with it. I mean, his first match, we've said it before, his first match is going to be a chance to win a trophy. So that would be awesome.
Yeah, well said. I mean, one of my criticisms of Ange, and I think it's important to pause for a second and remind the listener, before the Europa League triumph, there were very few people who didn't feel like it was time to part ways with Ange Postecoglou, right? So there's an emotional aspect to wanting Ange to stay. There's a pragmatic and data-driven approach to parting ways with Ange. And I think data leads us to everything that you're saying, right? That we analyzed the squad and felt Thomas Frank was the right person to continue this project. Now, interestingly enough, this year, Brentford finished, if I'm not mistaken, 10th. And that was with the 19th lowest or highest, right? They placed 19th in wages. The year prior, they were 20th in wages and finished 16th. And then the year prior to that, they were 19th in wages and finished 9th. Pretty impressive. And then in their first year as a Premier League club, don't forget Thomas Frank drugged them from League One, if I'm not mistaken, to the Premier League. And in their first season in the Premier League, they finished 13th. So my point is, Thomas Frank is somebody who gets more juice out of the squeeze than what should be there, right? And I think, unfortunately, we're an organization that benefits from someone like that. I think Pochettino was very similar in his ability to get more out of the squad than what they on paper should show, right? So in theory, I think a really good hire. Robbie, I want to come to you as a Residence Vibes guy. What are the vibes on the social interwebs right now? Are people excited? Are people apathetic like myself? Are people down about this? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the mixture of who I allow on my timeline, I should say, because
Sure.
I'm very careful what Tottenham fans I allow to show up on my timeline, because there's some really negative, annoying people out there. The people on my timeline are a mix of like, this is a tactically great decision. He's going to, exactly what Max was just saying, and a mix of my stance of like, hey, well, I'm still hurt over Ange, but like, I'll get there. I get it. I understand. So I think it's a little bit of both. I haven't seen, I mean, there are still some of those Ange truthers out there who are a little mad. Like, I don't know if you guys saw the story about, it was like the mayor or somebody of Melbourne wrote a letter to Daniel Levy saying, please reconsider. I don't know what his title is. That's probably not. He probably wasn't the mayor, but he was somebody important in Melbourne.
Yeah, it was the mayor of Melbourne.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's, again, there are definitely people that don't like this hire, but those are Spurs fans who don't like literally anything. So I don't have them show up in my algorithm anymore. So
understandable. That's smart. I think it's very important to gatekeep our timelines for sure. So, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think after the Mourinho and the Conte experiences or experiments, we could say, I think people recognize that Spurs maybe needed to rethink their management approach, and Ange really did fit that mold. I think the concern with Ange, which in my opinion turned out to be fairly valid, was that he hadn't done it at the level of the Premier League. And that's not to be like Premier League snarky or anything like that, but it is a different beast. It's extremely physical. It's for sure the most technically, I want to say technically gifted. I think Spain would have something to say about that, but just the most competitive, pound for pound, talented league in the world. And it's different than Celtic, and it's different than the J League, right? And the A League. So I think some of that maybe spoke to be true with Ange Postecoglou with our finishes in the league. But Thomas Frank has proven himself as being able to do it in the Premier League. There's no question about that. So I think in a way, I think it's maybe a tweak on what we thought the Ange hire was, but definitely a safer bet where you're probably more interested in throwing into the pot and placing a bet that this thing goes well. So very, very interesting though. I think it's important to note that Levy did come out and say we understand that there's what the fans want and then there's what's best for the club, and they do feel like this is best for the club. Max, I'll come back to you, and I don't know how much you know about this, but my understanding is that Thomas Frank has spoken very highly of Spurs and even said in the past, it's all coming to the surface now that Spurs would be a preferred destination for him to continue his climb up the ladder of football management. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was an assistant of his back in the day came out saying, oh, they've joked about moving to Spurs and how he would want to coach there and how he holds the club in very high regard. I think that's important. It's his biggest job. That's the thing that I loved when we appointed Ange. This is going to be a manager that's not here to be a savior or out of a rut like Jose, Conte. Those are all managers that are I've already won the Champions League and the Premier League and everything. Let me see if I can do something good for Tottenham. Now, this is a manager that's taking over the helm, and this is the biggest opportunity of his career. And I think he seems like a guy that does revere the club and holds them in a high standard. He also is a guy that tried to get Archie Gray last summer and tried to get Brennan Johnson 2 summers ago. Did the squad that we currently have factor into his decision to come here? I think yes as well. And I think it's a good fit. It seems like he's excited to be here and has always thought of Tottenham as a bigger club. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what he does. On the wage structure point, yeah, Brentford had 1 million more, or not, yeah, 1 million more per year in wages than Ipswich, who was 20th. And then the jump to Southampton, who finished last, was 7 million. So it was pretty much Brentford and Ipswich that were 7 and 8 million below the next closest team. If listeners are curious, because I just looked it up, Tottenham were 7th, dude. So, which is kind of embarrassing, to be honest, to be 7th in how we're viewed. You would think we're a bit more spendy than that, but no. Aston Villa was 6th. They had 12 million more than us, and then top 5 Liverpool, Chelsea. Liverpool 5th, by the way. Chelsea, United 3rd, Arsenal, then City 1st, obviously. But yeah, I'd like to see us add to that. If we get Romero and Son potentially coming off the books, we better have 2 guys. Those are 2 of our highest paid players. 2 guys coming in, fill those spots. I mean, I have my eye on Xavi Simons and Buemo, as we've talked about. So I think there's a lot of potential here. He seems like he really has always had a soft spot for Tottenham, which is interesting. So I'm excited to see what moves he makes in the window. I think they did say that he was going to have some input on the transfers, but I feel like he does link well with the current squad we have.
Yeah, wage structure is very interesting here when we look at what comes next. I mean, I've talked about it a ton on this show. Transfer fees are a small part of what means a club is spending, in my opinion, right? Because we have, I mean, I'm not going to say we've like blown the ceiling off the place with transfer fees, but we've spent money on from a transfer fee perspective. But it's all our wage structure. We were talking off air. 5 players, including Timo, who's no longer at the club. So currently 4 players are over $100,000. It's Son, Kulusevski, Madison, and Romero, right? And everybody else makes under $100,000. Anyone else we're competing with, and this is weekly, right? But anything else we're competing with in the top 6, promise you they have more than 4 players making over $100,000 every week, right? So wage structure is where we've really fallen short, in my opinion. I think wage structure and depth go hand in hand. I don't think you can acquire the quality of depth that you need to win the Premier League or win the Champions League without a wage structure that looks very different than ours. So I'll be curious to see what the club continues to do from a wage bill perspective as we continue to climb the charts, or I want to say climb the charts, but progress into the Thomas Frank era. I worry that I think he's a great manager, but I worry until the wage structure is increased and broken, we could say that he really can't elevate us to that next level, and that's not his fault. So there's more than just Thomas Frank here that goes into this. But yeah, let's talk tactics. I think we talked about it a little bit off air too, and Max, I know you were kind of driving the conversation here, but apparently he's fluctuated between a 4-3-3 and a 4-2-3-1. And like you said in kind of your opening monologue about him, you do think he's going to fit into our personnel pretty well. We've also talked a lot about how we want to see managers who formulate their tactics around their squad and not just shove their squad into their tactic, right? And it sounds like he's going to be that guy. But Robbie, when we look at the squad, we start talking about Madison, we start talking about Kulusevski. Max is talking a lot about how there's a 10 here. Do you think, maybe my question is there anyone in the squad that you think could really benefit off the top of your head from something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is mostly influenced by what I've read on Twitter, but a lot of people point to this last season where both Mbeumo and Wissa were both really elevated at Brentford, whereas they weren't previously. And obviously they lost Tony, and they've lost, Brentford has gone through several strikers under Thomas Frank's career, and he seemed to just easily plug and play them. So a lot of people have mentioned Brennan Johnson as being somebody that could really be elevated by Thomas Frank in this system. I saw an interesting thread yesterday talking about Son, of like, while Son was the leader, the captain of this club, he was never ideally a good fit for Ange's style of play. Mm-hmm. And his worst season in the last however many years was still like 20 goal involvements last year or whatever. But that if Son were to stay, if he were to be, as we've always dreamed about, maybe a halftime sub or a 60th minute sub, Son could be eaten again, or maybe he starts again because he's rested and we have a lot of people to rotate now. So wingers in general, I seem to be a thing that comes up. Our favorite Twitter follow, Invert the Wing, is talking about Kulusevski, as we've already mentioned, but apparently as a false 9 is where he envisions, if we want to take Invert the Wing's word as Bible, the idea of a false 9. And, I guess I'd be curious to see what it means for Solanke. I've seen people kind of say that this might actually not be good for Solanke, Frank. So I don't know what that means for him. But yeah, and then I guess I would be curious too, especially if we need to know the back formation that Thomas Frank is going to run, because he has run a back 3, he has run a back 4, and he has run a back 5 even. I think he started this year in a back 5 this last season. So we need to know what that means. A player I'd be really curious to see, I know we've really given him a hard time when he's back from injury, would be Radu Dragusin. If he's a player that Frank can build the system around or find, again, this is probably dependent on Romero not being here. But if Dragusin is someone who can step up, I mean, for all the shit we've given Dragoshin, he was like a top player at the Euros last summer or whatever that tournament was, where he was getting all of this press for like being really good. So maybe he's another player that if he's back from injury, Thomas Frank can engineer the squad around a back line that's not as, doesn't require Dragoshin to be as athletic as Ange did. So those are just a couple names I've seen on the internet being thrown out there.
Yeah, that's a good shout. I like the Dragoshin shout. I think Radu is a wonderful defender. I think he's really rough when it comes to, first of all, playing a high line, but being on the ball a ton. And then you couple it with the Ainge system where our two center backs are required to defend really as a two in a lot of instances throughout a match, right? Which he was never designed for. So I'll be curious to see what this can do for Radu. But the other interesting thing is Kulusevski as a false nine. I don't know enough about Thomas Frank's system to be able to say much about Dom Solanke. Unfortunately, it's interesting because I think
if you don't, I think the worry is that like I think we've all like we all have some general knowledge of Brentford. Like when you think about Brentford, you think about like Wisa, Mbeumo, like this is the post Tony era, like, and like who is their striker? You don't know because it was like such a fluid front three, which is where like what Robbie said, like people think Johnson, Son, Tell, like in a front three that's pretty much like interchangeable across the front three. Those players fit in because they can kind of play anywhere across that front three. And Solanke is just, I think the concern is that he's such like a striker, like 9 mold that it would be hard for him to play in a system that's that fluid.
Makes sense. No, it makes a lot of sense. I think Dom can get involved in the buildup and the distribution, but I don't think he can do it anywhere other than centrally, right?
Yeah.
From like a hold up perspective. And so that makes a lot of sense.
But the thing about Frank is he has the flexibility because before that, although it was less successful than this past season, like the focal point was Ivan Toney. So if he wants to do a system where he has that number 9 that kind of holds it up, links up, but is also like a proper poacher, which I think Dom could be. He could do what he had with Tony, but I feel like the football being played and the results weren't as good when he was like relying on just Ivan Toney, and I think our personnel more suits the fluidity up top. Because throw Kulu in there as well. I think he like Kulu, Tell, Johnson, Son, like these are all guys that can play across the front three, and super interchangeable.
That's interesting. So we may end up seeing some sort of 4-3-3 under Frank. But like we've talked about a lot too, I think we all believe that he can come and assess a squad and then make the best tactical decisions based on what he's seeing in training. It's all going to happen really fast. I want to talk transfers now. That's going to factor in here big time. And we're going to talk a lot more about transfers as the summer goes on, right? It's really just heating up. But there's some interesting links out there. Max, what are you seeing as far as links? Robbie, same. I'll come to you after Max, but
yeah, I can just throw some names out. According to Transfer Market, they like kind of list it by like likelihood. So I'll just throw out the top 3. You guys can run with these. Semenyo, Antoine Semenyo from Bournemouth, is the number 1 most likely target according to this website. For Spurs, we've seen links on Twitter as well, monitoring that. Cardoso is also here. We can kind of gloss over that. It seems like he wants to go to Atleti. He just had a howler against Turkey, so I don't know if that changes things. We obviously have investments in him. And then Eze is the 3rd one in that top 3. And then Angel Gomez from Lille. I think he's available on a free. He's another like 10 type of player, as well as Victor Froholt, center midfielder from Denmark.
Copenhagen, right? If I'm not mistaken.
But yeah, those are the top 5 according to this website. So yeah, what do you guys think? Anyone stand out?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think Eze's the name that jumps off the page the most to me for sure. I I just think he's extremely talented. I think Semenyo is an interesting shout too. The one name that you didn't mention that I know you and I are both very high on is Brian Mbeumo.
Yeah, farther down the list. He's still on the list, so
yeah,
not unfathomable, but he is a ways down.
Yeah. There's talks of him going to United and wages being the driving factor behind that decision. Robbie, is there any names Max didn't mention that you're seeing or want to bring up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I am mostly concerned with what's happening defensively because we don't know anything about Romero. So we have seen center back names floated out there, like Jared Branthwaite being the biggest one.
Yeah.
I think his name's Jared Branthwaite. I'm blanking on his first name if it's not Jared. He would be one, and apparently Everton has interest in Basuma and Richarlison, and because his asking price of Branthwaite is like 80+ million pounds, maybe two players thrown their way will cheapen that, and Tottenham actually could make something happen because we know we're cheap. As well as Collins, I believe, is a center back at Brentford who's 23. Apparently, Frank wants to bring him along if he can.
Yeah.
So, I that's what I need to know personally is I need to know what's happening at center back. If Romero's staying, great. I fucking love Romero. I want him to stay. I would go so far to say as like Frank would say, let's make you captain. Maybe that's what Frank needs to do in that one-on-one closed door meeting with Romero to get him bought in. So, but if Romero's gone, I get it. And if so, that's my number one pressing issue is what the hell are we going to do to replace him? So, I would look at center back names like Branthwaite or Collins, I guess.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think center back is extremely important. Even if Kuti stays, I think a left-footed center back or someone who can at least play on the left side, even if they're not left-footed, right, I think is really important. I like both the names Braithwaite and Collins. Braithwaite, I think, is one of the most talented up-and-coming center backs in the Premier League, maybe even in Europe, right? I think he's 21, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 22. 22, yeah. But I think he has a very high ceiling, and he's starting to get called up to the national team pretty regularly. I really like that name. I also like Collins. The only thing I know about Collins is that he becomes absolutely world class in Football Manager. I mean, all his stats are green for anyone who plays the game. When you see all green, that you're cooking with gas. And I really like the Collins shout too. Obviously, he's played under Frank already, so I think that's a name that I'm very interested in. The one name that we had, or the one position we haven't really talked about is the 6. And in my opinion, I think the 6 is our most important position. Angel Gomez, like you said, Max, he's like an 8-10 from my understanding. And he was a Man United Academy product, ended up going to Lille. He's been balling it at Lille. And I know Ange was really high on him. So we've been linked to him since before Ange parted ways with the club. It sounded like we were going to be going in pretty aggressively for him this summer, regardless of who the manager was. Or I should say, at least regardless of whether Ange was there or not. But still an 8, not quite a 6. So, yeah, I believe there was I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but there's a Danish 6 who we were very interested in. But it sounds like he's maybe on his way to Atletico Madrid, unfortunately. Maybe that frees up the Johnny Cardozo link. But, is there any 6s you guys are hearing about at all?
Yeah, I haven't really heard much. There was some Wharton grumblings. Honestly, dude, that would be me. I'm just gonna say it right now. Adam Wharton is just he's not worth what they're asking for him. On the center back point, I think I just don't. We have to see how Frank is setting up because obviously I think Romero is better than anyone on the market. But I do think that Collins and Branthwaite are definitely more primed for a lower block, more defensively minded center backs and not as good carrying or passing the ball than Romero. One name we've been linked to is his name Johan Bisek? His last name is Bisek.
Yeah, Inter Milan.
Yes,
center back. Yeah, he's good.
So high on this guy.
He's good.
So he I think he's Yeah, if we can snag him from Milan, he wasn't really starting for them. He's a really fast. He's good passer, so he kind of fits more in that Romero archetype. So if we wanted to fill his shoes, I think Basek would be my choice. Then I'd probably go Collins second, and then I don't really think Branthwaite would be worth the money. I'd rather just take Collins because he's played with Frank. I think they're kind of similar profiles.
Yeah.
Number 6 role, Robbie talked about earlier. People have been talking about Polinia. From he had a bit of a rough season, but he was really good for Fulham before that. Carlos Baliba from Brighton, he had a bit of a breakout season this year. But yeah, dude, it's tough, man. I think I'd prefer Wharton to both those guys, but I think he's going to be the most expensive, so I wouldn't mind either one. If I was in Dreamland, I'd take Ederson from Atalanta because he's just like a super well-rounded player. And I don't know, maybe like Paratici, Serie A, like can get something done. But also I know Frank's a huge fan of Archie Gray, so who knows? Like they're talking Bentancur extension. Maybe they just throw in Archie Gray and Bergvall in the double piv and we move that way. So I don't know. Yeah, there hasn't been much for the 6th position.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the double pivot. If we do end up playing in a 4-2-3-1, I think there's, it becomes a partnership, and you don't rely so much on that sole number 6, which is playing as a sole number 6 in the Premier League. I'll say it all the time, is probably one of the most challenging things in the sport of football to do, in my opinion. So I think there's a lot to be said for playing with the pivot. The one name that I'm seeing at least a lot of people talking about, I wouldn't say I saw any concrete links, but Morten Hjulman, Hjulman from Sporting. He's a 6. That's a name that people are talking about, at least hoping to see Spurs show some interest in. And again, at Sporting, I think there's a conversation for him to move up to a top 4 or top 5 league. Nothing against the Portuguese league, Liga NOS, I believe it's called at this point. But we all know the Premier League is a step up from there. So that's an interesting one to track. Transfer market has him as a $50 million price tag. So I don't think he would come cheap. Sporting tends to get their money as well. But he's won 4 trophies in his time at Sporting. So he's a winner, and he's somebody that I think I would show some interest in if we started seeing that name float around.
Was he linked to Atleti? I mean, I'd prefer him to Cardoso.
Yeah, same. I think there's been talks about him to Atleti as well, but I'm not quite sure. I think I saw something about Dean Huijsen going to Madrid, and I thought I saw his name going to Madrid, and just like I was moving quick, so I'm not actually sure if he's linked to Madrid at this point. He might be, but Cardoso, do us a favor, go to Madrid and pave the way for someone else. I guess to Johnny's credit too, I think he's been really good in La Liga. He tends to just not bring that to the national team, and that's been pretty consistent for him, right? So whatever. The national team's a whole other conversation, but if he can come ball for Spurs, I wouldn't be mad at him.
He's really defensive, I think. Like, do we want that? Like, I don't know.
Well, that's a practice conversation. Like, who knows how we're actually going to want to play football, right? I think we got a lot to figure out.
Football is like defensively pretty sound.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I don't know, but he does dribble a lot. Like, maybe we want someone who's more of like a passing first option. So yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting because it seems like we're extending Bentancur. So, yeah.
Time will tell. Let's move on from transfers. Like I said, we're going to continue to talk about transfers over and over and over and over this summer.
It's closed, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is closed, and reopens again
Sunday, I think.
Yeah, sometime this month. I'm not 100% sure.
I think it's only closed for 6 days. So I think it opens on Sunday.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know it was just a short closure. They opened for this last week for the Club World Cup, essentially, right? And they'll close again and then reopen. But I want to talk about expectations. And Robbie, I'll come to you for this. Obviously the expectation is winning the quadruple, right? At this point in time, that's what we all expect. But no, all jokes aside, I think, as we said, Thomas Frank is going to have an opportunity to win a major trophy, in my opinion, and people will pick that apart. I understand there's some that see it as just a preseason friendly. I see it as a lot more than that. It's a UEFA trophy, so he's going to have a chance to win a trophy in his first match. But when you look at what would constitute a successful first season for Thomas Frank, and beyond that, the expectations that we should have for him, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm going to keep them pretty close to what I was going to have for Ange, and I think that's what everyone is going to do. And whether that's fair or not, honestly, I don't care. But this is the place we're putting him in. I think the first two competitions I'll address. I think everybody, including the board, are in line with this, in that he needs to finish in a European place, which could be up to 8th place or whatever. I don't know how the quotient works these days. So top 8 or top 7, any sort of European competition qualifying for next year in the Premier League. Champions League, I was going to say this for Ange too, as long as we make it to the final 16 or that knockout round that gets you to the final 16, fine with that. We don't have a deep enough, strong enough roster to win the Champions League. It's not going to happen. Maybe, I'll eat my words gladly if it does, but there's no way it's going to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah.
My personal expectation for Ange, and Scott, you agreed on this, we both thought this was very reasonable, was that we could win an FA Cup or a Carabao Cup next year under Ange. I would love that for Frank, but I would say my expectation would be, as long as we get to like a semi, or even hopefully at least get to a final of one of those domestic cups, I would call that an A+ season. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I guess the better way to answer your question, Scott, is that's me saying that's an A+ season. That's maybe not what I think is the most realistic or what is going to actually happen. But again, going back to the Ange sentiment, knowing that he knows how to prioritize a competition to win a trophy, I don't think us winning the FA Cup or the Carabao Cup would have been a ridiculous thing under Ange.
No.
With Frank, I don't know. That year one, it's impossible. Like the difference between a manager going into year 3 and a manager going into year 1 is so vast. Like we don't even know what we can't really give Frank an honest assessment, because he might be unlearning everything Ange taught over the last 2 years. We really don't know what's going to happen. I really hope it's a smooth transition. I really hope everything I just said comes to play, but I think ultimately the only things that matter for Daniel Levy are top 7 in the Premier League and round of 16 for Champions League, because that means paychecks are coming in for the club.
Yeah, Max, what do you have to say about any of that?
Yeah, I think top 6, we should get it. I mean, I think if we gave Ange another shot and we were like 7th, 8th, like I feel like that would have been a disappointment for the next year. So I think top 6 is a fair expectation for Frank. UCL knockouts, I mean, I think we can win a game. Like, there's so many teams now. Like, we can win the round of 32 likely. So yeah, hopefully get to the last 16, see what happens. As for the other cups, yeah, I hope deep run one of those would be cool. I mean, if you want to sack the other one, just give us a shot in one of those. I hopefully the FA Cup, because they also play that on weekends, and it's just like easier, and there's less games, and it's just better. So yeah, I'd say like top 6 knockouts of the UCL would be a good like first season for Frank. And if he can throw a Super Cup on top of that, that'd be pretty sick. But this PSG Super team is going to be pretty scary. But you don't know what he has in store. We could get a 5-back game 1, take it to pens, then it's anyone's game. So yeah.
Well, I think PSG fully expects to make a run at the Club World Cup this summer too, which teams are taking it very seriously because of the dollars that come with that competition, right? So I could see PSG making a very deep run and then having to turn around. I actually think PSG could very well win the Club World Cup, and then have to turn around and scramble, I think like 10 days later or something. Don't quote me on that, but roughly 10 days after the Club World Cup ends, we're starting to talk about the Super Cup. So, yeah, who knows? I'd love to win that trophy. I agree with you guys. I think last 16 of the Champions League would be a really good mark on his resume. I do think finishing top 6, I could even say top 7 probably would be acceptable in our first year, but I don't think he needs to do this, but I really, really, really would love him to focus on the FA Cup. Not only does it get you a place in the Europa League, which I won't be turning my nose up anytime soon, right? Nose up at anytime soon, but I have that taste of silverware, and I want that again. And honestly, the squad does too. And I think that elevates us when it comes to this knockout competitions. Players are going to believe that they can win again, right? So, really like it to focus on the FA Cup. But again, I think if we can get to the round of 16 and finish top 7, I'd be pretty happy with the season. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't think just hiring Thomas Frank elevates us to winning Premier Leagues and winning Champions League titles. That takes a lot more than just the manager of the football club, and that's a whole nother conversation that we'll have, or we'll continue to have for as long as we're Spurs fans probably. But I don't think the club will set him up to be able to compete in those two competitions. I don't want to say if ever, but maybe if ever. So we will see. But yeah, it's going to be really exciting. I think we're in the new era of Tottenham Hotspur. Unfortunately, we've gone into new eras probably far too often as of late since 2019, and that's a big part of why we're here as well. But definitely wish Thomas Frank all the best. Is there any, and Robbie, I'll come back to you for this as the vibes guy. Is there any players, and I'll say outside of Christian Romero, because we all know about that, which we can talk about that for sure, but is there anyone you want to highlight as being concerned that they're maybe on their way out after this appointment?
I don't know. I mean, I guess Son is a wild card, like he really is. I will say the report I saw today doesn't make me as enticed to be like, yeah, Son could go. It was like apparently Al Hilal, whoever is talking to him, offered 30 million euros for him. That doesn't do anything for me. I would maybe rather see Son finish his career here over 30 million euros. So that doesn't
That's
do
more
much
than I
for
would
me.
bid for Son, but I don't think I would take it.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's there. I guess I think my logical answer would just be Tell. Like, are we going to buy him or not? It sounds like Frank wants him. I know everyone on this podcast has been harsh on Tell here and there. I still, he's a young kid. I very much like his potential. Absolutely, his finish is a question, but I like his potential. So I'd totally be open for Tell. I hope we negotiate under the 50 million euro fee or whatever it was that was locked in when we got the loan for him, but I hope he wants to stay because I think he would be an exciting player to keep.
Yeah, good job.
I think Tell is staying. Just like social media, just reading the tea leaves, it just seems like he's a Tottenham player. I don't know. Hasn't been any indication of it really being like dicey. I know they're negotiating for him right now. Transfer market only has Romero as like the only player linked away concretely right now, and it's to Atleti or Real Madrid. That's what it says. And then the only other one on this list is Mikey Moore to Dortmund, which we talked about in the past. I really would hate to see that. I don't think that's going to happen, but we need to get a new contract for Mikey Moore pronto. That should be something that gets done this summer. Get ahead of it. Get him on a good club-friendly deal. That'd be awesome. Yeah, so aside from Romero, I think Son is probably the most likely to go. And other than that, I mean, we picked it up for Ben Davies. I think Bissouma should go. I think he's going to I heard links about Everton, like Robbie said earlier, but I've also heard like stuff about Turkey, Galatasaray potentially. Richarlison is definitely up in the air. I haven't really heard much. I mean, Everton would make sense for him, but then we also aren't like linked to any strikers. I guess we were linked to Liam Delap earlier. Yeah, so I think Romero is definitely the big one there, and then And then I would sell Bentancur. I would maybe sell Vicario. But that doesn't look like likely to happen. So I think Romero, Basuma, potentially Son, potentially Richarlison. We'll see how it plays out. But nothing crazy that we haven't heard before. I think the manager search has just overshadowed everything pretty much.
Yeah. It's interesting. Richarlison's interesting to me. I personally wouldn't like to see him go. I think not only is he capable of playing out wide or through the middle, but I still think that there's something there. And I at least would like to see Frank assess him before any decisions are made, right? And give him the opportunity to fit Richarlison into his plan somewhere. Especially like you said, we can't go into the season with one striker on the books. And I don't count Will Langsher when I say that, right? I'm talking about Dom Solanke. I think Richarlison needs to be around.
Tell maybe.
Yeah, that's a good shout too. I mean, I always think of Tell as a wide player, but I probably shouldn't. I know he sees himself as a 9. And like you said earlier, a fluid front three, I think Tell fits in really well there. I think Richarlison can. He's not as technical, probably, right? But he will get minutes for Brazil in the near future. And again, I think it's worth assessing someone like that at least before decisions are made. I agree with you on Basuma. I probably don't agree on Bentancur. I kind of like Richarlison. I think that it would be worth Thomas Frank assessing him before any decisions are made as well. And then Cuti Romero, I don't know. I understand that he has ties to Ange Postecoglou. I mean, Cuti knows more than we'll ever know about what actually happened last year and what things actually looked like. But I don't think that I could ever feel that the league finish was okay, right? Obviously, they won a trophy together, and that's emotional. I think Cuti Romero, if he goes, will get a nice fee. But I would also remind Cuti Romero that he's under contract and may have no choice but to play for Tottenham Hotspur Football Club next year if we choose that's the best option for the club. And nobody of his stature is just going to throw a hissy fit and not play for a season, right? That he can't afford to do that. So if he's at Spurs, he'll play his heart out like he always does. And for me to be okay with Romero leaving, I want to see a nice dollar sign next to that outgoing transfer for sure. We're going to need it, and you can't replace Romero with anybody at this point in time. So that's one to really pay attention to. And then Son, it was interesting. Son was asked on international duty with Korea about his future, and he didn't say he was going, but he also didn't say he was staying. And I think that's unlike Son. I think Son has in the past come out and said, I want to finish my career here. And he definitely did. He just said, we'll see what happens, right? And I could see a world where Son is comfortable leaving on a high, lifting that European Cup, right, and then kind of riding off into the sunset. And I know that we all want to say things about the Saudi League, and I'll never stop saying things about the Saudi League. I think sports washing is awful, and we all know, what lies beyond just sports washing itself when it comes to going to Saudi Arabia. But I also can't ever fault someone for looking at something that could be generational wealth for the next 5, 6, 7 generations either, right? Especially at Son's age. So I think there is a world where Al Hilal entices Son enough for us to take $30 million and move Heung-min Son on, which be really tough. But I've also said many times on this show and just in conversations with Spurs fans that I think Spurs fans get a little too attached to players at times, and I understand it, right? But the biggest clubs in the world, they sell players when it's the right time to sell that player. And granted, fans probably are less upset about it because they're winning trophies, but we've not done that. So anyways, not to go on a rant about Sonny, but I do see a world where Son Heung-min is sold this summer, and it would be tough to see, but if it's the right move for the club, then so be it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's probably going to do it, fellas. We're going to continue to have a conversation about Thomas Frank. We're going to continue to have conversations about transfers. This will all continue to progress in time. But like we said at the beginning of the show, it was 2.5 hours ago, roughly, the Spurs announced that Thomas Frank is officially the manager through 2028. So keep your eyes peeled for sure. Anything else you guys want to mention or talk about before we wrap up?
Well, I'll quickly say, because I think this is funny. Honestly, it's kind of sad, but it's funny. Kulusevski did some sort of interview or something recently where he said he's way ahead of schedule in his recovery, and his quote was, "I can walk again." I don't know why I thought that was so like, wow, that's such an up. Like he couldn't walk, and now it's like, okay, so you're so ahead of your recovery, but you still are
I
8
can
months
walk.
away. Yeah, like I can walk again. Okay, well that's I'm happy for the guy, but that's just like the first sentence of his update was so exciting, and then it was like, oh no, okay, you're still so far away. But he's ahead of schedule, so
That's hilarious. Yeah, I kind of forgot that Kulusevski was going to be quite injured going into next season too. So I'm glad you bring that up. Kulusevski's going to have a long time to figure out what life under Thomas Frank looks like before he steps onto the field, and that could be a very good thing. But yeah, like I said, much more to come. Please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We are at Lilywhite on all social media platforms. We are the official YouTube channel of Seattle Spurs. You can find Seattle Spurs at Seattle Spurs on all social media platforms. You can find me at Scotchy Bird. You can find Robbie at Robbie_Light and Robbie Light on Twitter. No underscore there. You can find Max at Going Limbs on all platforms. Like we said, liking and subscribing is very much appreciated. Most importantly, it helps us grow Seattle Spurs, which is the point of all of this, right? Also, it's the off season. If you got friends who are unaffiliated but are getting into the Premier League, you know what to do. Get them down to one of the pubs. We can be found at the Wits End in Finney Ridge. We can be found at Rainier Growlers and Cascades in Puyallup. Whether you're on the north or south side of the Sound, you got a fairly close home to come watch Spurs at. So pack the bars this summer. It doesn't have to be a Spurs match. We have the Club World Cup coming up. We have the Gold Cup coming up. There's actually a shit ton of football coming through the pipeline, fellas. So we'll probably do some episodes that are not necessarily Spurs-centric, but just football-centric as well. We are all football fans first and foremost, right? So, and Seattle Sounders are playing in the Club World Cup. Y'all are both big Sounders fans. I'm a Houston Dynamo fan, if any listener doesn't know that by now, but I'll definitely be pulling for Seattle this summer to see what happens. So we'll probably do some Club World Cup episodes. But, that being said, make sure you're following along and you can grab all the content that you need. But for myself, for Max, for Robbie, we appreciate everybody's time. Tip your bartender as well. And as always, come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.